Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your invitation. And good morning to all participants. Good morning to Professor Alessandra Carucci, Vice Rector for International Affairs, Mariano Porcu, Chair of the Department of Political Science, and Nicola Tedesco, Dean of the Faculty. And of course, many thanks to Professor Marian Peters, our keynote speaker, is scheduled for today. And of course, thank you very much to Professor Francesca Ippolito for this important initiative of this institution of a Jean Monnet Chair titled European Climate Change. And of course, thank you to Gianluca Borzoni, Luca Pantaleo, Francesco Asiazio, and Gian Lorenzo Zicchi for animating this Jean Monnet Chair. I'm going to have a concise speech address. The topic of this Jean Monnet Chair synthesizes the aim of the general problem of the 2050 objectives. The real challenge is to create the perfect culture for the European Green Deal. And it seems to me that the aims of this chair are consistent with this idea. It is impossible to follow such crucial objectives without considering different branches of knowledge. And at the same time, the Paris Agreement is really ambitious. It's not easy to achieve the decarbonization of member states only by law. And it means that we have to consider not only the definition of new laws, but also the history of the relationships among states and the impact of different policies on social life. We have seen in the past that some communities have improved their economic situation. At the same time, globalization has been an accelerator of some processes without paying much attention to the environment, the CO2 emissions, and the planet-saving policies in general. And nowadays, it is really hard, I think, to ask a part of the world to renounce a profit without constraints. And also, it is essential to comprehend that it is not only a technological problem, but a more general problem to conceive life and our relationship with the planet. And I think the debate that this chair will stimulate can be viewed as a contribution on the generic topic. As rector of the University of Cagliari, I'm proud of this institution of the chair. As I promised at the beginning of my other speech, it should have been a consistent speech. But let me spend just a few words about what is happening not so far from us. Just 1 hour ago, we announced the initiative of our university for Ukrainian students belonging to our university, and at the same time, the initiative for people that would arrive. On our web page, you can find the info about what we are doing, grants, hospitality, and other things. For now, we have committed about 200,000 euros. It's terrible. When we think about how to restart after the pandemic, we must consider how to curb the war. It seems a nightmare. Let us imagine a world without wars. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you to all.
Thank you very much to this speech from our rector, very thoughtful. I will leave the floor to Vice Rector for Foreign Affairs, Professor Carucci. Thanks again, Francesco.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you all the participants, and particularly to our keynote speaker, Professor Marianne Peters. And I want to, first of all, to congratulate Francesca for having set up this proposal and for having been successful, because this is a very important thing for our university, to have this German chair specifically on this such important problem and issue, and which can be enlarged to many, is something that is really, I think, interdisciplinary. I mean, I'm an environmental engineer, so I know how the climate change issue and the environmental problems are important, but I also know how the legislative framework is important for when we have to work within the environmental problem, and this must be done at European scale. And as you can see from my background, we are also within the University of Cagliari is also part of the European Alliance EDUC, which is one of the European universities set up by the European Commission. So they are alliances of more of European institutions, European universities. We are now 6 universities, and we are going to enlarge to 8, possibly from next year. And I think that this initiative can also be offered to all the students within the alliance. This is what I was discussing with Francesca, that specifically the new master course on European climate justice could be offered not only to the students of the University of Cagliari coming from different faculties, and particularly that of engineering and architecture for sure, but also others. I think that all the students could be interested in such topics, such important topic. But I will also offer it to the students of the alliance, so that maybe we can also create synergies with the other universities on this topic. I've seen from what I listened at the beginning that you are already creating also a network outside the University of Cagliari and collaboration. So this is an opportunity for us to have cooperation and collaborations and setting up new and interesting things. Also within our European University Alliance, we had a series of seminars on some research topics, and one of the research topics that was considered important for the Alliance is that on European studies. And the University of Cagliari was the organizer of the seminar on European studies, and we had to have it online because it was during the pandemic, but we are now going to organize it physically, hopefully next April or May at this point, I would say. And so I think that this part could be involved in the seminar and could find some other relationships outside. So thank you again. I will try to listen at least to the keynote speech, but then I will have to leave you, unfortunately. But I wish you a nice seminar and all the best for the work within this German chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, for these kind words addressed to me and to us and to the project. I'm not able to see if it is already in, but I have to give the floor to Professor Nicola Tedesco, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Nicola, sorry, because I can't see you in the images. So it is the Dean of our Faculty of Law and Political Science and Economy. So you have the floor, Nicola. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca. Sorry for my late, but I was doing my 2 lessons today. And sorry if you for the rumors, because we have a little problem in the faculty. I'm very proud to the result of Francesca, because it's an honor for us to get a chair, jump on a chair, and this event is so important because every kind of cooperation of development of our studies are important, especially in this period, and in which we are living a great problem of about the war. So I hope that this is an important step to develop collaboration for everybody, and so I want to be short, because I hope that other person can get a better contribute. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for this address. I don't know if also Mariano, so Professor Porco, the director of the department, is already in, because I know that he had also classes, so I don't know if he is able to be here now, and I ask kindly to who is able to find all the names in the platform, so Don Lorenzo or Luca, if could help me from my limited visual of the screen in seeing if he is in or not.
Al momento non lo vediamo.
Non lo vedete. Può darsi che sia, so maybe we had some unpredictable problems. So when he is here, so please just let me know, but just say a few words of introduction of this event for not leaving and wasting time and then limiting the intervention of the keynote speakers. This chair has a title that is evocative and provocative at this time, because it recalls the concept of climate change, but it also refers to a change of peace. The title of the chair is European Climate of Change. And so this change of peace is not only necessary, but is also already ongoing in the meantime, in the worst sense of the worst possible change imaginable as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war, in which the flow of the time is relative to those who are observing it, while it is a certainty for those who are subjected to it, and which, because of the Europe's energy dependence on Russia, has already called for a relaxation of the objective of climate neutrality. So if time, according to Aristotle, was the measure of change, Einstein saw time as a stubborn illusion. The future exists simultaneously with the past. And so on the climate issues, time is the most precious commodity we have. And Europe strives to be a climate resilient society by 2050. And the European Green Deal is a commitment by the European Union to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement. As such, it contains a wide range of policy initiatives with the main aim of decarbonizing member states. Achieving these goals means reviewing current laws and creating new ones. In order to curb these dynamics, it is required not only a specialist legal knowledge, but also an understanding of the underlying political and scientific issues. And there is therefore an emergent demand for more conscious European scholars, but also European citizens, about the modern environmental law and the growing crisis of climate change, as well as a growing need of more conscious European citizens for tackling sustainability and social justice issues. And on this ground, Professor Peters, who held the position of Professor of Environmental Policies and Law at the School of Law in Maastricht University, and Leonardo Massai, who is Associate Professor of International Environmental Law and Climate Change in the Catholic University of Lille, whom I thank deeply for being here today, will kick off our 3-year research and teaching program to analyze the relationship between the times of planet Earth and the times of the humanity it hosts, a relationship on which the survival of the entire system depends on trying to understand what law and diplomacy are doing, can do, and should do. So I will just give the floor to our keynote, and so to Professor Peters, if Professor Parco is not arrived in the meanwhile I employ in his time. So Professor Peters, thank you very much. You have the floor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor to deliver this keynote speech on the important topic of how law can address climate change and how the European Union deals with that. Before I proceed, I would like to share my PowerPoint presentation with you.
Yes.
It takes a few seconds for downloading the PowerPoint. I have exercised this morning and it works well, so it should be available soon. There it is. It is at least at my screen. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, yes, of course.
Ah, that's great. Thanks, Ruth. So thank you for giving me the floor on this topic of climate neutrality. So the title of my presentation is Towards Climate Neutrality in the European Union, the Role of Law. But before moving ahead content-wise, I would like to extend my congratulations to Francesca Ippolito for having got this important Jean Monnet chair on this topic, climate change, a climate of change. And I would like to support the words already expressed by Rector Mola and the Vice Rector Carucci on the difficult times we face and about the importance also to have a multidisciplinary view on a topic as climate change. Because let me be clear on that from the start. It is, of course, true that law alone it cannot solve the problem of climate change. We need to have societal change. We need to have a change of mindset. We need to take into account economic situations, economic justice, and of course also technical opportunities. Engineering is important to innovation and to accommodate new techniques, also to reduce the use of fossil fuels. So within that broader context, the very difficult and fast changing international political situation, also the need for multidisciplinarity, there is still the value in discussing the role of law, because law is a very powerful instrument in our society to try to change society. So from that perspective, my lecture will be delivered. And before I delve into the more specific legal steps that have been taken by the European Union, I would like to set the scene by discussing with you some key features, some key characteristics of EU climate law. And the first is an obvious one. We have to head towards climate neutrality, but we do that in an uncertain future. My presentation of today is based on an earlier presentation with the title Managing the Uncertain Future. So that was a couple of months ago that I delivered that presentation, but that's even more true today. So on the one hand, we will discuss today how law has codified obligations on the long term, but even on the short term, there are also targets codified. But that can be in the law, it can be in the books, but society changes. So that's already one very important dilemma to deal with. Second key characteristic of EU climate law is the fact that the European Union is very, very much based on the rule of law. Hence, we do see that at EU level, the EU legislator really uses law as well in order to achieve policy objectives, such as becoming climate neutral. So the EU has imposed on itself, by means of law, binding targets for 2030, which is already very soon, and for 2050, which is more long term. So clearly, it's a very clear characteristic of EU climate law that the rule of law is used as an instrument to achieve the objectives. Then the third characteristic is that if we look at the already adopted EU climate legislation, it's an enormous package of laws. There are many, many, many different laws already adopted at EU level over the years. And I call that as a largely uncharted legal territory, a largely uncharted legal territory. With that, I want to say that it has become almost impossible for one single person, a scholar or a politician, to understand the whole body of EU climate law. It is immense. Moreover, it is fast evolving, so there's a continuous updating necessary almost of the development of the legislation. Moreover, we see an increase of case law as well. So it is a tremendous task to get sufficient knowledge of EU climate law, let alone to understand how these laws work in practice. And for that reason, it is actually very good that with the help of the European Union, funding is provided to set up networks among scholars, also like a JMC chair, in order to help each other to understand this package of EU climate law. We have to cooperate with each other in order to help each other to understand the whole package well. So now I focus on one specific climate law, which is a new one and a very important one. And here it is. It is the European climate law, adopted less than a year ago in June 2021. And this European climate law establishes a framework for achieving climate neutrality. The European climate law amends some other laws, including what we call a governance regulation. So the EU had already adopted a regulation on the governance of the energy union and climate action. And that regulation, it's in the title, it's a governance of the energy union and climate action. So the EU there chooses the mode of governing towards an objective. And governing means like more a proceduralized approach based on plans and dialogue, establishing a dialogue among the EU level and member states and between member states on how to achieve climate neutrality. This governance approach is often a bit hard to understand for hardcore lawyers, because hardcore lawyers want to see precise obligations and so on and so forth. But we have to put on the hat a bit of a political scientist in order to understand this governance approach. Well, there are several important elements in this law, and a crucial one is the codification in this law of the climate neutrality objective. So here we see it in this Article 2 that in 2050 at the latest there should be climate neutrality in the European Union. Climate neutrality is what we call a net target. It's not zero emissions. No, it's neutrality, which means that there can still be some emissions, perhaps from aviation, for example, but that has then to be compensated by the extraction of carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere, for instance, by absorbing them by planting trees. So it's a net target, but it's codified here, climate neutrality in the European Union in 2050 at the latest. And after that, the Union shall aim to achieve negative emissions. So after having achieved climate neutrality, the EU should not stop with efforts, but we should even try to achieve negative emissions by perhaps techniques we don't know yet now on absorbing carbon dioxide or by nature-based solutions. It's an unprecedented challenge. We are already now in 2022, so it's a challenge for the next 27, 28 years. Impressive. What is important if we read this mitigation objective is to see that it is a collective achievement. Actually, during the legislative process, there was a proposal from the European Parliament to establish climate neutrality at member state level. That would mean that each and every member state had to achieve climate neutrality within its own territory. Of course, we know with the European Union, we are an organization with 27 member states. So a collective climate neutrality would mean that there can be an offsetting within that territory. Perhaps at some places there will be more absorption of emissions and at other places there will still be some emissions, but that can then be taken together as one EU bubble, one EU territory, and for that territory climate neutrality then would have to be achieved. So the European Parliament, which is normally very much in favor of the EU spirit, wanted actually to move away from the collective achievement, but to establish individual member state climate neutrality. That did not get a majority in the European Parliament. So what we have now in the European climate law is still this collective achievement. However, that immediately raises some questions, because what should then every member state do? The law says necessary measures, so that member states have to take necessary measures. But that is, of course, a term that needs further interpretation. What is then necessary for Italy? What is necessary for the Netherlands, etc.? So that will, of course, be a huge political debate and battle, I think, on how to decide what each member state has to do. Also, the enforceability of this collective achievement is a key issue and still a key question. If we look into the explanatory memorandum to the European climate law, so the proposal from the Commission, you won't see there already some thoughts on enforceability of this collective achievement. So there we are. On the one hand, very important, rule of law, codification of the climate neutrality objective with as a collective aim, which adheres to the spirit of what the European Union is and brings along cost-effective opportunities. But on the other hand, how this then can be enforced in the traditional sense of going to court is yet undebated. And of course, as a lawyer, I always hope that it's not necessary to go to court, because then we have non-compliance. But at the same time, it's such a tremendous challenge, as already was referred to by Rector Mola, that issues of non-compliance can be, of course, expected, unfortunately. Next to the 2050 target, there is also a 2030 target in the European climate law. before the European climate law, the EU had already decided to move to emission reductions of at least 40% in 2030, but that percentage has been increased to 55%, which means a more ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction target for 2030, which is only 8 years from now, very, very soon. This is also a net target, so also there a balancing can take place between emissions and removals. And during the legislative process, there was pressure from the European Parliament to become more ambitious, even more ambitious than the 55%. As a kind of political compromise, I guess, we now see that in the definition of this target of Article 4, we see a limit to the contribution of sinks. Sinks are absorptions of greenhouse gas emissions for the net target. This limit to sinks means that more priority is given to emission reduction. So there was a kind of fear that there would be not enough emission reductions because use then would be made of sinks, and that was politically not seen as a favorable option. So that about the 2030 target, which has this feature of really putting forward emission reductions and restricting the use of sinks to a certain limit. But the codification of this target alone in the European climate law, of course, will not lead to the change in our society. For that, more is needed. And one thing we need are more specific laws in order to impose obligations on emitting industries, on other sectors, on member states to reduce emissions. And the EU is currently seeing a massive legislative process where many already existing EU climate laws are amended in order to increase ambition. And this is called the Fit for 55 package. And I will come back to that. I will come back to the hard law later, this amendment of laws. First, I would like to draw your attention to another very interesting element of the European climate law. In its Article 6, paragraph 4, there is an obligation for the European Commission, which implies a consistency assessment. It means that the European Commission has to assess for any draft measure or draft proposal or legislative proposal, the Commission has to assess the consistency of that new action with the objectives of the European climate law. In other words, when the Commission wants to move forward with another law and wants to adopt a legislative proposal, there needs to be a consideration how that proposal contributes to achieving the objectives for 2030, 2050 with the European climate law, particularly for the climate neutrality objective. This is a duty to state reasons, how the alignment takes place, and in case there is decided not that the proposal is not in alignment, there needs to be an explicit motivation of that. This is also a procedural obligation. It's a duty to state reasons, but it's of course very important for society to understand why certain decisions are being taken and to be able also to contest about that, because it will be clear for the European Parliament then what the reasons are, and then a political debate can take place. And what I personally also look forward to is to see whether this issue can also play a role in the procedures under the Aarhus regulation, which has been amended last year and which has broadened the internal review possibility, which means that NGOs, but also civil society, can start an internal review procedure with the Commission, so that the Commission has to review its decision. So that's, for instance, for delegated acts, a very important possibility. This is all new law. Hard to predict how that will develop, but in principle, here we do see important possibilities also to contest the Commission if, for instance, civil society thinks that the arguments why not alignment is chosen with the objectives, why these arguments do not hold, and hence reconsideration has to take place. I think that this topic is also very interesting for Francesca Ippolito, because I know her also from the literature with a book on the integration principle. And one of the integration principles we have in EU law is the environmental external integration principle, which means that environmental considerations have to be taken on board when adopting other legal acts, so in the field of transport, etc. And here we see a more specific regulation of a kind of integration principle, but then in the other way around, that means that every other measure has to take into account the alignment of that new measure with the climate objectives. So in my view, a very interesting new provision in EU climate law, and we have to explore further what that actually means and what it contributes to a sound legislative package, including delegated acts by the Commission. The European climate law also has seen the establishment of a European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change, a new body, a new board. I think we could have a full session already on the relationship between science and policy making and law, also how science can play a role in the courtroom. So behind this provision, I think a lot of discussions can start on how will the board be established, how does the nomination procedure look like, how is independency agreed, what are specifically the tasks. And I have put on the slide also some core questions, particularly very fundamental. What will be the influence of the reports from this new board on decision making by the EU legislator, by the Commission and delegated acts, but also on case law? Will it be in the future that in court procedures, and perhaps you have seen, that we really have this increase of climate change cases, but to what extent will then specific reports, advices from this board play a role in the courtroom? Will NGOs use certain reports from this board in order to contest against certain governmental decisions that they find they are not ambitious enough? So that is, I think, one important research line to follow. And I have provided some extra information on the slide for those interested. You can read it. It will be distributed after this lecture. But if anyone wants to engage with that, please, I'm very interested into any further thoughts on the relationship between science, decision making, and the courts. I think a very important theme under the European climate law. Okay, so the European climate law. We have objectives codified. A core question is then, of course, how to achieve them. And as I already have explained, this is a governance approach. That means it is embedded in what we call procedural obligations. According to procedural obligations, obligations to develop a plan, to have this dialogue among member states and the European Commission with member states, that is the way, a more political approach, how then these objectives have to be achieved. However, I already told you, there's a broad package of EU climate law. It's not only this governance approach that is on the table. We already also have really hard law obligations. We have a European Union emissions trading scheme. That's a directive from 2003. We have this instrument up and working with an increasing price at the moment, which as such can also lead to some difficult discussions on what the prices then mean actually for society. So I have heard in the introduction that there will be a master course on European climate justice, very important. And I would be very interested to know how the EU approach for establishing a price through the European Union emissions trading scheme, a price on fossil fuel energy use, for instance, how that will influence the debate indeed on climate justice, because energy prices will go up through this mechanism in order to phase out ultimately fossil fuel. Okay, but that's hard law. EU ETS, a market-based hard law instrument. But that is complementary to the European climate law, which is based on a governance approach. What are then key legal elements of a governance approach? As I already told you, the European climate law builds upon an already existing law, the governance regulation. And this governance approach then consists of, first, the obligation for member states to develop national plans, integrated national energy and climate plans. This is an obligation for member states to develop the plan. And there is an obligation also for the member states to involve civil society to enable public participation. So there is this obligation for the member states to establish public participation. So we call that a procedural obligation. It does say nothing about the outcome of the plan or the ambition of the plan, but it says that there has to be communication with the public when developing that plan. Then, if we then take the EU perspective, very important is that the Commission has the obligation to assess the national plans, to assess whether the national energy and climate plans are in alignment with the objectives of the European climate law, the 2030 target, the 2050 target. And then, very importantly, the Commission has the competence to issue recommendations to member states. The Commission may issue such recommendations. I think there was someone waiting in the lobby. I get the sign. Thank you very much. So the Commission may issue recommendations. Well, according to the EU treaty law, a recommendation has no binding force. So a recommendation does not mean that then there is an obligation for the member states to follow that recommendation. It's a communication tool. It is a recommendation to do this or that. However, what is very important, that is that the governance regulation says that the member state has to respond to the recommendation in the sense of explaining how due account is being taken of the recommendation. So I formulated like this: when the Commission issues a recommendation, the recommendation as such is not binding, but the recommendation triggers a legal obligation for the member state to explain whether it is followed, and if not, why not then? So what account is taken of that recommendation? So it is a legally formalized dialogue that takes place. And if we combine that with case law developments that we see in some jurisdictions, such as in my jurisdiction in the Netherlands, I can imagine that this dialogue can also enter the courtroom, that some elements of that dialogue will also be used, for instance, by NGOs or by others, in order to try to convince judges to intervene there where the NGOs think that governments fall short. Of course, this is all new law, so it's hard to predict how law will develop. I think that's actually yeah, who knows how these kind of provisions develop, but I do see some signs that it might develop in such a way that as such a recommendation is, according to EU law, not directly binding, but in an indirect way it can influence discussions in the courtroom as well. On this slide, I have again visualized a bit this governance dialogue. So member states are obliged to develop a plan. They have to explain what they are going to do, the short-term, long-term strategies. There is also an obligatory content of the plans. With that, I mean the regulation says what topics have to be addressed, but no substantive requirements there. And this all is also embedded in transparency. With transparency, it's of course also endeavored that also civil society will, be involved in this whole discussion on how to achieve the objectives. I'm not sure how this is developing in Italy, but I would like to share with you that I'm often worried or disappointed if I see how media discuss such approaches as these from the EU. I think generally that civil society is not enough educated or informed about EU actions. I also saw that 2 weeks ago, the European Commission has proposed something very important, which is a due diligence law that's about holding multinationals accountable so that they respect people and planet. But I did not see that in the Dutch news that this was proposed. Well, it's such an important new step, I would say, at EU level. So yeah, I think if we take a multidisciplinary mode, as was referred to, it would also be very important not only to discuss among us legal scholars about these laws, but also to try to reach out to society to inform what's ongoing, and that there is an opportunity to participate and to reflect on the decision making. What are then concretely next steps? Well, the first tranche of national plans, that already happened. So by the end of 2019, the member states have already submitted their plans. So we are already in the middle of the governance approach. The governance approach had already started with this governance regulation from 2018. What are from now on then the next steps? Well, in March 2023, so a year from now, member states have to submit their first progress reports. Because as you know, you can have a plan, but what happens after the plan? Member states have an obligation to develop a progress report so that they communicate whether they could implement the plan or not. And that progress report, those progress reports have to be submitted next year. A few months thereafter, the member states have to consider to update their national plans. That's in June 2023. Of course, very important if you, for instance, if you imagine that it was too difficult to have 100% success with the plan, there needs to be a reconsideration on how to update then the national plan, or if there is more scientific evidence that we have to step up, that could also be a reason to update the plans. And then in September, the Commission has to make an assessment of the collective progress by member states and also the consistency of the Union measures with the climate neutrality objective. So that's an assessment of, well, the adequacy of measures at EU level. And the Commission has also to assess the consistency of national actions in light of the objectives. And there, in 2023, the Commission may issue recommendations. So we have to book in our schedules to save some time then to watch what's going on and to see whether the Commission decides to issue recommendations, and if so, what happens then? The Member States have to respond to those recommendations. Next to that, in 2023 is also a very important year under the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, in its Article 14, has established what we call the global stocktake. That's also a kind of assessment at the global level whether the efforts are enough in light of the Paris temperature target. This global stocktake has to take place in 2023, and the European climate law says that within 6 months after the global stocktake, the Commission has to put forward the target for 2040. This target for 2040 cannot be adopted alone by the European Commission. No, the European Commission has to propose them to the European Parliament and the Council on how to amend the European climate law with a target for 2040. But that needs to be based on the outcome of the global stocktake, which is a global collective assessment on the basic question, are we doing enough or not? So yes, it will be very important by the end of 23, beginning 24, and that is still within the Jean Monnet project of Francesca to look at what's happening there. Because of time reasons, I skipped this slide. This is just another attempt to make clear all the building blocks of the governance approach. And I would like to spend a few words to the public, to civil society. Perhaps that will also be part of the course of European climate justice, I'm not sure. But with climate justice, I also think about the possibility to involve civil society within the decision making. So I can imagine that this article is very relevant then for the students there as well. The governance regulation, that is the first governance regulation on which the European climate law is built, has an article on, and I find it very remarkable, on public consultation. Well, according to my language interpretation, I think consultation is very different from participation. Participation sounds very far more ambitious than only consulting. But if we really read the article itself, if we skip the title, then we see in the article that it is public participation. Moreover, the EU has no free choice there, and the member states not, because we are, as a European Union and all member states, a party to the Aarhus Convention. And the Aarhus Convention is a convention that aims to stimulate what is called environmental democracy. So it's based on 3 pillars: access to environmental information, public participation to governmental decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters. And this is the second pillar, public participation. And the Aarhus Convention has an obligation to enable the public to participate also with plans and programs. So that's Article 7. And when preparing this keynote, I must say we always encounter upon new developments. I saw that the Aarhus Compliance Committee has issued an advice to the European Union on the public consultation of the final national energy and climate plans. So this is already worth to study, like what are exactly then the legal rules on public participation? What does the Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee exactly recommend here then to the European Union and the member states? And how is this then being done in practice of the member states? Legal cultures differ, there are different modes for public participation. So it will be very interesting to see how different member states try to enable the public to participate. And this is not easy. Try to imagine how to involve your whole society of your country in the development of such an important plan, how to transform society in order to achieve the climate and energy objectives. The Article 10 refers to administrative complexity. So it's perhaps even hard to reconcile. So on the one hand, the public needs to be enabled to participate, but on the other hand, this is of course also surrounded with complexity. How to take good account of many inputs from the public. Imagine that the public is not unanimous and that there are very different sorts of input from the public. So how to deal with that, and how then to make progress with your plan, because you can be thinking and considering and taking into account days and days, but then still the plan is not issued, and we need to speed up our actions in order to achieve the objectives. So I think this is a tremendous challenge, how to take on board the public and how to make quick enough progress with the plan. I do not have a good advice at this moment for the government how to deal with that. It's truly a challenge, I think, to deal with that, also with a lot of costs. So interesting topic, important, but yeah, also not easy to implement in practice. And I'm nearing a little bit the end of my presentation. I see I have about 7 minutes left, I think. Please intervene, Francesca, with the time, if necessary. There's also something else which is very difficult to understand. It's very important, though, at the same time, and that is that the European climate law has codified that these activities have to take place in a spirit of solidarity. So the climate law refers to a spirit of solidarity between member states. I cannot explain at this moment what this spirit of solidarity actually means with regard to the energy structure of the whole European Union. I think it's worthwhile that legal scholars, but perhaps also in a multidisciplinary setting, try to elaborate on that. What does this mean, the spirit of solidarity? It is actually an obligation for the member states to respond to the Commission recommendations in the spirit of solidarity. Moreover, in Article 2, it is also said that member states shall take the necessary measures at national level within the spirit of solidarity. But then, if we look at the case law, and this is a case not related to the European climate law, but it has to do with a specific administrative decision on, let me say, competition with gas pipelines. So this is about the energy market and about the regulation, which actors have access to a gas pipeline. And there a legal conflict emerged where a German authority issued a decision on the use of such a gas pipeline, and Poland disagreed with this decision and went to court. Well, such a national decision is then a composite decision, so it is done in cooperation with the Commission. So there was a legal procedure against this Commission decision authorizing, to say so, the German authority to adopt that decision. And in that legal procedure, Poland referred to the spirit of solidarity, which is codified in Article 194 of the TFEU, which is the energy article. And in the specific secondary energy internal market law, the spirit of solidarity was not codified. And I find it a very difficult case to read because I'm not an internal market energy specialist. But my takeaway from this case is that the Court of Justice of the European Union has said that this spirit of solidarity principle is justiciable. So the court has opened the door for legal procedures where there will be discussions on the spirit of solidarity. And I think we have seen that much more in law, that as such principles, vague notions, are still adjudicated in court. And at this moment, I think the takeaway is that the spirit of solidarity is codified in the European climate law, and we see in another case on the internal market that the Court of Justice has said that it's a justiciable principle. Well, the principle is in the TFEU, in the energy article, hence it would be very strange that it would not be justiciable in the European climate law. I cannot tell more about this at this moment, except that this is a challenge for the politicians and for us as scholars to try to imagine what the spirit of solidarity will mean. And now with the recent developments, where we have a lot of discussions of the dependence of the European Union and some member states. I believe Italy is also quite dependent on the import of gas from Russia, that this spirit of solidarity, particularly when there is scarcity of some resources, will perhaps be even more important. But I have no idea how that actually will develop, and this needs to be part of the whole dialogue, I think. If there is anyone in the audience who would reflect upon that, I would welcome that very much. But I think potentially very important that it has become justiciable. Well, after this a bit complicated discussion of the governance regulation, I would like to end my presentation then. I have more slides, but I think my time is almost up, with the good news of hard law. As I said, next to the governance regulation, we have the hard law, and this is actually a visualization of this hard law. We have emissions trading. That's a legal instrument with a cap on total emissions under the EU ETS, which gradually reduces. So this is quite a hard law instrument in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It covers more or less 40 to 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union. A very, very important legal instrument already established by the European Union, not amended by the governance regulation. So it is there and it continues to exist. It will be amended now, at least that's an attempt, in order to make it even more ambitious, to lower the cap in order to implement the new 2030 target of 55%. Next to emissions trading, we have the effort sharing approach, which is a regulation which imposes on each and every member state a greenhouse gas emission reduction target. There are flexibilities there. Leonardo Massai, the discussant, is an expert on the Kyoto Protocol, and this effort sharing approach is a kind of approach that resembles the basic idea of the Kyoto Protocol, which means that there are hard emission reduction targets together with some flexibilities for member states to trade in these rights in order to achieve cost-effective outcomes. It is a regulation. It is imposed on member states. It is hard law. With that, a lot of greenhouse gas emissions are covered. We have also now a land use change and forestry regulation, hard law to the member states to achieve a net outcome of emissions and removals. Also very important. We have other targets and measures. We have a taxonomy regulation now that puts a label on investments in order to be qualified as sustainable. There has been an immense debate, and there has been tensions on how to, immense discussion on how to label investments, but we have it. Next to that, we should not forget about that. There is funding, massive funding, in order to steer the society into a more sustainable direction. So this, in a nutshell, is perhaps the good news, that next to the governance approach, which we need to follow and apply, we have other tools available as well in order to address this challenge. With that, I think I give the floor back to Francesco. I'm sorry I could not finish all my slides, but there's so much to discuss when we look at climate law. Francesca, I give you the floor back. Thank you very much.
I guess you're in mute, Francesca.
Sorry. I was thanking Marian for clarifying tremendously complex and uncertain notion and ambitions on governance regulations and the EU climate hard law, and for the insight she opened up on a broad spectrum of issues on which we will engage as chair to reflect and to return to debate, hopefully also with Marian, in an ideal circularity in the final conference in 2024, and on which an initial reaction will be the one of Leonardo Massai, to I will pass the floor. Leonardo. Thank you again, Marian.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And I have a few slides to so I'm going to share my screen as well.
Okay.
Just a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not going to take a lot of time, of course, just a few minutes, and I have just a few slides with me. And I hope you can still see my screen. Yes, so thank you very much, Francesca, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure here, and congratulations for the chair that you just acquired. And it's a pleasure to be here online, and hopefully next time we will be able to meet together in your beautiful city and Island. And greetings also to Marian. It's nice to see you again, and also to all the participants. So I'm just going to raise a few questions that, given my role, that probably we will not have the time to answer now today, but also may hopefully open some ideas for your research, Francesca, and for further collaboration. And I'm going to try to give to these questions the international angle, which is basically the area of my work. Although, as Marian mentioned, I also have studied a lot the Kyoto Protocol and the EU case. So is European climate law the right answer? So can we get to decarbonization by law, climate neutrality, which was mentioned by Marian? So let me also try to address three major points in my brief intervention, and also allow me to be a little bit provocative on what Marian just described, the one very important landmark piece of law in the world and in the EU about climate reduction. So first of all, the first point, 3 points very quickly. The first point is the impact of the European Union greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So what is the impact of the EU in the climate change, which is, of course, a global problem? And here in this picture, you have just some information about the second piece of the 6th assessment report that is going to come out this year from the IPCC, which is reminding us that climate change is there, global temperature is increasing, we need to reduce emissions much more than what we are doing right now. And you have on the left side a very small picture where you can see the so-called nose down graphic, where you have a nose and the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions drastically. And the last piece, which was published 1 week ago from the IPCC, is just telling us that we have to do a lot, to cope with the consequences of inaction. So the EU is, as you can see from this picture, one of the major emitters of greenhouse gas emissions today. Of course, China has the biggest role there. Then we have the US, and the European Union is the third in the rank in terms of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So clearly, the European Union has a very important role to play, and is playing a very important role, especially when it comes to law. Together with the EU, we have, of course, the US, but also the big emitters and other big developed countries like Russia and Japan. And the importance of this topic, especially today, is very clear. Cooperation, international cooperation, which was mentioned by some of the interventions before, is key, and is just the foundation of the Paris Agreement and international climate regime. If you just have to think that just a couple of months ago in Glasgow, COP26, Russia and Ukraine were speaking together in the same small group, negotiating group, and they were speaking together just to defend their interests and priorities on climate change. So the importance of international cooperation is key. The second element I want to address is the European Union doing enough. And Marian mentioned the European climate law, and mentioned also the legally binding obligation legislation that we have in the EU today. So the European climate law is just the codification and the transposition of the European Union commitment in the Paris Agreement into EU law, which is the 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. As Marian mentioned, this is complemented by specific hard law legislation. And also an important element to be mentioned is that the European Union is not now requesting any contribution for international credits and marketing, and the European Union ETS, which is the emissions trading system, internal system, is just linked with the neighboring countries like Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. But the EU is still continuing the possibility to explore the possibility to link this system with international cooperation. So is the EU doing enough? Unfortunately, at the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, we don't have the capacity to judge what countries are doing. But here you have just a picture from an independent rating of all the parties to the Paris Agreement, what they are doing there. And this is mentioned the European Union is overall rating is insufficient. So the European Union is doing very well in terms of legislation, but is not doing well in terms of international cooperation, in terms of, as you can see here in the middle, fair share, which is the relation between the political commitment and the finance, which is provided to developing countries, for example, but also to other countries. So there is a mixture of judgments here, and this think tank, which is providing this rating, is one of the most important that we have worldwide, since in the Paris Agreement and the Convention, we are not able to judge what countries are doing in the terms of Paris Agreement implementation. But clearly, the EU can do more than that. The last and third point that I wanted to mention is the EU a recognized global leader on climate change. So European climate law is clearly a model and a very big model for many countries. And I myself studying a lot what other countries are doing in terms of climate change legislation. And the EU climate law is clearly a model in legal terms. The Paris Agreement was signed in European territory and is, as you all know very well, the new treaty for the next decades. But the question is whether is this sufficient or not, and whether the EU is still a global leader in climate change. This is just indicating that the Paris Agreement, which was negotiated in European Union soil, has also an ambition mechanism which will drive us towards 2050, in line with the objective of the European Union, and will also allow the whole international community to take stock of where we are in 2023, and to make sure that the targets and the commitments the countries have decided themselves are adjusted. And let me also conclude on the question about is the EU a global recognized leader, with these four pictures, which are the four persons that were speaking on behalf of the EU in Glasgow at COP26, just highlighting the fact that probably politically, despite the Treaty of Lisbon reform, we still are lacking a unified European Union voice recognized by other actors. And here you have the President of the European Council, the President of the Commission, Frans Timmermans, who was leading the EU delegation, the COP, and the Foreign Minister of Slovenia, being the President of the Council of the European Union. So still is there a question of leadership when it comes to EU and climate change, and is that sufficient to recognize the EU as a global leader or not? That is a question that I want to pose and leave you there. Thank you very much, Francesca.
Thank you very much to you for highlighting the insufficient action of the EU in terms of international cooperation rather than legislation where the EU is a model, and so for opening ideas on further research and further collaboration between us. And thanks to the team's member of the chair and to the rector and vice rector, Professor Carucci, that is still here, and to all the guests for dedicating your time and energy to this event. You will find the materials of the presentation of Professor Masai and Professor Peters on the website of the chair. So stay tuned and hope to see you all soon. Thanks a lot and enjoy your day.
Bye-bye.
Greetings to you all. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.